Hi. I think this is the last recording. I've been working backwards through papers now, and I think this is my earliest first author paper that I'm going to record, and then from now on it'll be ones that are coming out. So that's very exciting. The paper today is a 2017 article published in Animal Cognition, The Gestural Repertoire of the Wild Bonobo, paniscus, a mutually understood communication system. And this is by myself, Takeshi Furuichi, and Richard Byrne. Abstract. In animal communication, signalers and recipients are typically different. Each signal is given by one subset of individuals, members of the same age, sex, or social rank, and directed towards another. However, there is scope for signaler-recipient interchangeability in systems where most signals are potentially relevant to all age-sex groups, such as great ape gestural communication. In this study of wild bonobos, paniscus, we aimed to discover whether their gestural communication is indeed a mutually understood communicative repertoire in which all individuals can act as both signalers and recipients. While past studies have only examined the expressed repertoire, the set of gesture types that a signaler deploys, we also examined the understood repertoire, the set of gestures to which a recipient reacts in a way that satisfies the signaler. We found that most of the gestural repertoire was both expressed and understood by all age and sex groups, with few exceptions, suggesting that during their lifetimes all individuals may use and understand all gesture types. Indeed, as the number of overall gesture instances increased, so did the proportion of individuals estimated to both express and understand a gesture type. We compared the community repertoire of bonobos to that of chimpanzees, finding an 88% overlap. Observed differences are consistent with sampling effects generated by the species' different social systems, and it is thus possible that the repertoire of gesture types available for Pan is determined biologically. Introduction. Animal communication includes a vast array of signalling systems, ranging from the warning coloration of noxious insects to the complexity of human language. Language is exceptional in many ways, not least for being a system of largely arbitrary signals that an entire population has the capacity to use and understand. In many other communication systems, the signals that an individual can use are strictly limited to their age, sex, or social position. Thus, the visual displays of lekking bird species, peacock spiders, smooth newts, and ring-tailed lemurs are produced only by adult males and directed toward females. In other species, females direct visual signals towards males, for example, the bioluminescent signals of fireflies or cowbird wing strokes. For cowbirds, this visual signal given only by females is in response to a vocal signal given by males, illustrating that although both sexes are signalers and recipients, they are not signalers and recipients of the same signal. Great ape gestural communication might be more similar to language in the sense that no such restrictions have been noted. Signalers and recipients are in principle interchangeable for all signals because gestures are movements of limbs, head, or body which could potentially be produced by any one individual. Limitations on interchangeability may nevertheless exist, as in other species. Obvious physical requirements may shape usage, for example, only adult females carry infants and juveniles, and therefore may be the only ones to deploy gestures that signal, "climb on my back." Less trivially, gestures may be limited to subsets of individuals because of subtle differences in adapted traits or developmental experience. A major aim of the current research is to determine whether great ape gestural communication genuinely shows interchangeability. To date, great ape gestural research has focused exclusively on the expressed repertoire, the set of gesture types that an individual deploys. Expressed repertoires have been described for all great ape species in captivity and for wild chimpanzees. Here we also examine the understood repertoire, the set of gesture types that an individual receives and subsequently understands. Great apes intentionally deploy gestures. In first-order intentional communication, the signaler uses gestures in order to change the behaviour of the recipient, and the meaning of a gesture can be determined by its apparently satisfactory outcome, or ASO, which is the reaction of the recipient that satisfies the signaler, confirming that the signaler's intended goal was met. To determine whether a gesture is part of an ape's understood repertoire, we take the converse approach. If a recipient reacts to a gesture with an ASO, then it can be taken to have understood that gesture. Studying gestural communication in the wild enables a better estimate of the repertoire than in captivity, because the range of circumstances in which communication occurs is not artificially constrained, for example by food provisioning, veterinary interventions, restrictions of group composition, and contraception. In an 18-month study of wild chimpanzees, the community repertoire was shown to be close to asymptote at 66 gesture types, a much greater estimate than in previous captive studies. Nevertheless, the average individual expressed repertoire size was still only 10 gesture types, and individual repertoires were shown to be far from asymptote. And so by asymptote, I mean they haven't leveled out. The more instances we're seeing, the more gesture types we're seeing, so it's still climbing, and you would hypothesize like the group repertoire reaches this asymptote, which I think actually, spoiler, we'll see later. We therefore propose that it is appropriate to maximise the available evidence by reporting both the understood and expressed repertoires of great apes in order to more accurately chart individual repertoires and to detect possible differences of usage among species. Comparing expressed and understood gestural usage should allow us to detect limitations on signaler-recipient interchangeability. This paper is the first to catalogue the community repertoire for a wild community of bonobos, and so it also gives the first opportunity to compare with a community repertoire for wild chimpanzees, in order to investigate the degree to which they overlap. The chimpanzee repertoire appears to be largely species-typical, biologically driven rather than acquired on an individual basis. Note that some gesture types may be learned socially, and we may be rethinking this hypothesis in a future paper. And we examine whether the same is true of the bonobo. Comparison with the other pan species allows the possibility of a shared pan repertoire to be explored, and by studying both of our closest living relatives, we may be better able to understand the evolution of human language. Wouldn't that be nice? Methods. Study sites and subjects. Fieldwork was conducted at Wamba Luo Scientific Reserve, Democratic Republic of Congo. We followed 2 neighbouring communities of wild bonobos. E1 group, with 39 individuals, has been habituated since 1974, and P group, with 30 individuals, has been habituated since 2010. In 2014, the total sample size was 63 individuals, with 28 adults, 16 females, 12 males, 12 adolescents, 7 females, 5 males, 9 juveniles, 6 females, 3 males, and 14 infants, 8 females, 6 males. In 2015, the total sample size was 64 individuals, with 30 adults, 18 females, 12 males, 8 adolescents, 3 females, 5 males, 10 juveniles, 7 females, 3 males, and 16 infants, 10 females, 6 males. Data collection. This study was approved by the School of Psychology and Neuroscience Ethics Committee at the University of St Andrews, and permission to conduct the study was granted by the Ministère de la Recherche Scientifique et Technologie in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Data collection took place from February to June 2014 and January to June 2015. We conducted daily observations from approximately 5:50 a.m. to 12 p.m. with a rough schedule of 4-day working and 1 day off, observing bonobos on a total of 204 days, amounting to roughly 1,159 hours of observation time. We used focal behaviour sampling to film social interactions. Filming began whenever 2 or more individuals came within 5 meters of each other in order to catch the beginning of social interactions. We recorded video footage using a Panasonic HDC SD90 video camera, which has a pre-record feature that continuously records the previous 3 seconds. Each day after returning from daily follows, we imported footage and sorted it into a clip directory using FileMaker Pro. Video coding, the exciting part that you've all been waiting for. Gestures were defined as discrete, mechanically ineffective physical movements of the body observed during periods of intentional communication, including movements of the whole body, limbs and head, but not facial expressions or static body postures. We created a separate coding sheet in FileMaker Pro for each gesture instance, recording the following information: signaler, recipient, signaler age and sex, recipient age and sex, gesture type, part of sequence, part of bout, audience checking, response waiting, persistence, and signaler apparently satisfied. Signaler is the gesturing individual and recipient is the individual to whom the gesture is directed. Age groups are taken from Hashimoto's bonobo age classification, where infants are under 4 years, juveniles 4 to 7 years, adolescents 8 to 14 years, and adults 15 years and over. Gesture type is defined by the physical form of the gesture. Where possible, following definitions are used with the chimpanzee, but adding new definitions for gesture types that have not been reported in the chimpanzee. A sequence is defined as a series of gesture instances given by one individual separated by less than 1 second. A bout is defined as a series of gesture instances or sequences given by one individual separated by pauses of more than 1 second. So we're distinguishing between these different types of sequences of gestures. Audience checking is when the signaler turns to face the recipient before or during gesturing. Response waiting is when the signaler pauses for over 1 second after gesturing while maintaining visual contact. Persistence is when the signaler continues to gesture at the same recipient. Each instance of a gesture was required to meet at least one criterion for intentionality before it was accepted for analysis: audience checking, response waiting, or persistence. For the expressed repertoire, we included all gesture types that an individual deployed. The understood repertoire, however, was not simply the gesture types that an individual received, but the gesture types that they understood. We took it that the recipient understood a gesture instance if the recipient reacted with an apparently satisfactory outcome, ASO, i.e. a reaction that satisfied the signaler, as shown by cessation of gesturing. The signaler should start to react during gesturing or immediately following cessation of gesturing. Note that an ASO must be a change in behaviour. If the recipient remains in the same state and the signaler stops gesturing, there was no change in behaviour from the recipient, and thus we coded no response, not ASO. For gestures occurring in sequences, if the recipient responded to the sequence with an ASO, that ASO was assigned to all gestures in the sequence, not only the final gesture instance in the sequence. Inter-observer reliability. To corroborate the accuracy of our video coding, a second experienced coder, Dr. Catherine Hobater, coded 100 gesture instances for the following information: gesture type, persistence, and signaler apparently satisfied. We calculated inter-observer reliability using Cohen's kappa, revealing agreement for all variables: gesture type 0.87, persistence 0.7, and signaler apparently satisfied 0.63. Results: bonobo and chimpanzee community repertoires. We recorded 4,256 intentionally produced gesture instances used within E1 and P groups, which we classified into 68 gesture types. The bonobo community repertoire. For wild chimpanzees, 66 gesture types have been reported, but in the present analysis we split two of the categories used in that study: touch other to touch other and stroking, and present sexual to present genitals forward and present genitals backward. So the comparable chimpanzee repertoire is 68 gesture types. With this correction, 60 out of 68 bonobo gesture types were shared with chimpanzees, an 88% overlap. And this is in figure 1, which is up on the screen, this Venn diagram showing the overlap. As noted in the caption to figure 1, several of the bonobo-specific gesture types have been discovered in chimpanzees subsequent to Hobater and Byrne's publication. So I'll read the caption for figure 1, which I don't think I've done in all of the other papers, I'm sorry. So this is a Venn diagram showing the gesture types used by chimpanzees and bonobos. 88% of the gestures overlap. And then we have in the bonobo section where there is a superscript 1. These were seen in chimpanzees at Bosu, but not reported in Bodongo. And then with a superscript 2, these were seen in chimpanzees at Bodongo subsequent to the Hobater and Byrne 2011 paper. So there's 5 out of the 8 bonobo-specific ones that have actually also been seen in chimpanzees, which then increases the overlap, I believe, to 96%. But we'll come to that later. Okay, moving on. Expressed and understood repertoires. The mean expressed repertoire for individual bonobos was 14.4 plus or minus a standard deviation of 7.69 gesture types. So that's each individual, on average, I saw them use about 14 gesture types. And this is from 65 individuals, and the range was 1 to 35 gesture types. The mean understood repertoire was 10.48 plus or minus a standard deviation of 5.86 gesture types from 65 individuals, ranging from 0 to 30 gesture types. Combining these estimates gave a mean overall repertoire of 18.82 plus or minus a standard deviation of 9.07 gesture types from these 65 individuals, ranging from repertoire size of 1 to 42 gesture types. A one-way paired t-test shows that the overall repertoire is significantly larger than the expressed repertoire. In order to examine whether any gesture types were primarily produced by one subset of individuals but understood by another, we matched the gesture instances in individuals' expressed and understood repertoires. For this analysis, we restricted the data to gesture instances, including those in sequences that were understood, giving 2,694 gesture instances and 60 gesture types. First, we grouped individuals by sex, female and male, and plotted the number of individuals that express, understand, or both express and understand each gesture type. And here we have, I'll put figure 2 up. Figure 2A shows females, and B shows males, and then C shows adults and adolescents, and D shows juveniles and infants. So analysis was restricted to gesture types that we observed more than 3 times, giving 47 gesture types. All were both expressed and understood by members of both sexes, with the exception of leg flap, which was expressed by but not given to males. We then grouped individuals into age groups, adult and adolescent, and juvenile and infant, and plotted the number of individuals that expressed, understood, or both express and understand each gesture type. Again, analysis was restricted to the 47 gesture types observed more than 3 times. Most gesture types were both expressed and understood by members of the 2 age groups. However, 3 gesture types, bite, arm up, and present climb on, were expressed by but not given to adults and adolescents. 3 gesture types, bite, beckon, and present climb on, were received and understood, but not expressed by juveniles and infants. 1 gesture type, roll over, was expressed by but not given to juveniles and infants. Finally, we calculated an index for each gesture type, with the number of individuals that both expressed and understood a gesture divided by the number of individuals that either expressed or understood the gesture. Provided sufficient data are available, values closer to 1 would show that most individuals both use and understand the gesture type, whereas values closer to 0 reveal gesture types that are typically used and understood by different individuals. Index values range from 0 to 0.89. We plotted the index, dependent variable, against the total number of gesture instances as the independent variable for each gesture type in figure 3. As the number of gesture instances increases, so does the index, suggesting that for most gestures, the index is a serious underestimate of signaler-recipient interchangeability. However, figure 3 suggests that when 2,000 instances have been sampled, an asymptote of around 90% overlap between signalers and recipients should be expected, i.e. 90% of the community will both use and understand every gesture. Discussion. When linguists and developmental psychologists study an individual's vocabulary, they not only look at the words an individual uses, the productive vocabulary, but also the words that an individual understands, the receptive vocabulary. and yet past studies on primate gestural communication have focused exclusively on the former, the so-called expressed repertoire. In order to examine the role of an individual as a signaler and a recipient, we also need to look at the gestures that they receive and understand. Here we use responding with an ASO as a measure of understanding a gesture, and we're therefore able to chart the understood repertoires of individual bonobos. Comparison of females and males revealed that members of both sexes expressed and understood all gesture types observed 3 or more times, with the exception of one gesture that was never directed at a male. Age groups showed slightly more exclusive gesture types, 3 that were expressed by but not directed at adults or individuals, 3 that were received and understood but not expressed by juveniles or infants, and 1 that was expressed by but not directed at juveniles and infants. That is, out of 47 gesture types that were expressed and understood more than 3 times, 42 of them were both expressed and understood by all age groups. A possible explanation for the few apparently exclusive gesture types may be the paucity of data, and differences may disappear with more gesture instances. Consistent with that hypothesis, relatively few instances were recorded in total for roll over, bite, or beckon, whereas it seems a less likely explanation for arm up and present climb on. Alternatively, differences in signalers and recipients between age groups may reflect the different requirements during those life stages. An individual's active repertoire may change through ontogeny, eventually including all gestures in the community repertoire. The interchangeability of signaler and recipient between sexes supports this conjecture. Over their lifetime, males and females will both have opportunities to use each gesture type. When examining whether individuals expressed, understood, or both expressed and understood each gesture type, we found that as the number of gesture instances increased, so did the ratio of individuals that both expressed and understood a gesture type. Our graph appeared to reach asymptote at 90%, with around 2,000 gesture instances per gesture type. That this estimate may be a reasonable one is illustrated by the case of gesture type present climb on. The gesture present climb on is how a mother bonobo gets an infant to cling to her body for travel, yet even this gesture type, which seems specifically useful for mothers and their offspring, proved not to be used by adult females alone. One adult male carried a juvenile consistently for approximately 1 month and intermittently for around 3 months, during which time he employed present climb on to encourage the juvenile to cling onto his body for travel. It would appear that absence from the expressed repertoire may normally represent limited opportunity to use a gesture type rather than absence from the actual repertoire. All this evidence indicates a mutually understood communication system that is, unlike many other visual displays, largely unconstrained by sex or age, and wherein all individuals are potentially signalers and recipients for all gestures. While a small minority of gesture types may be learned socially or by ritualization, the general interchangeability of signaler and recipient is difficult to reconcile with the one-way gestures predicted by ontogenetic ritualization. Mutual understanding is a vital feature of human language, that all shared language users know the same signals and meanings of the signals. Here we have shown that, like in language, all individuals are able to use and understand the same signals. Future research should examine whether these signals mean the same thing for all individuals. And there I recorded the paper that does that. The bonobos and chimpanzee gestures overlap extensively in meanings. You can find that, I think it was the previous paper that I recorded. Bonobo gestural communication is therefore an intentional, flexible, mutually understood communicative system, a conclusion that is made more striking by the fact that 88% of their repertoire overlaps with that of the chimpanzee. Actually, the bonobo-chimpanzee gestural overlap may be even greater. Several gesture types not reported by Hobater and Byrne, bipedal rocking, bipedal stance, hip thrust, rocking, swat, have since been seen in chimpanzees at Bodongo, Uganda, and one gesture type, arm up, has been seen at Bossou, Guinea. Including these gesture types raises our total to 64 gesture types shared with chimpanzees, a 96% overlap. That leaves 3 gesture types: bounce, leaf drop, leg flap, as apparently bonobo exclusive gesture types. All 3 of these gesture types are used in a sexual context. Bonobos and chimpanzees have markedly different social behaviour, which might plausibly be reflected in their gestural communication, with a greater repertoire of sociosexual signals. Bonobo females engage in female-female sexual behaviour, genito-genital rubbing, and are also more central to the group. This means that bonobos, in particular female bonobos, may have more opportunity to use sexual solicitation gestures, raising another possibility, that the differences between the bonobo and chimpanzee gestural repertoire may simply be an artifact of lack of data rather than the complete absence of a gesture type. Likewise, several of the chimpanzee gesture types that are absent in the bonobo repertoire are related to male displays and dominance, behaviour that is far less prevalent in the bonobo. The bonobo and chimpanzee repertoire therefore seem, to a very considerable extent, to be pan-typical. However, the question remains, do bonobo and chimpanzee gestures mean the same thing? Despite the differences in social behaviour between bonobos and chimpanzees, differences in the gestural repertoire are minor and perhaps artifactual, but while the gesture form might be biologically fixed, the meaning may not be and remains a potential source of interspecies differences. Future studies will need to compare gesture meanings between bonobos and chimpanzees in order to discover how profoundly biological their repertoire is. Comparison of our 2 closest living relatives is also important for understanding the evolution of language, with many of the component features of language, for example mutual understanding and intentionality, being present in their gestural communication. Acknowledgements. Many thanks to all of Wamba's talented research assistants, to WCBR, Tetsuya Sakamaki and CREF for giving permission to work at Wamba and for supporting my research, to Hunjin Ryu and Nahoko Tokuyama for additional video footage, and to Catherine Hobater, a second coder for Intra-Observer Reliability, and for helping KG learn how to code. Funding was provided by the Venner Gren Foundation Dissertation Fieldwork Grant, Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, Grant in Aid for Scientific Research, JSPS Core to Core Programme, and University of St Andrews 600th Anniversary Scholarship. This research was conducted under Permis de Recherche number blah 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 blah. Sorry, it's a long one and it's in the written acknowledgements. Granted by the Ministère de la Recherche Scientifique et Technologie, formerly the Ministère de l'Enseignement Supérieur, Universitaire et Recherche Scientifique, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And there aren't too many references in this one, so I'll let them scroll up a little bit. Thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed learning about the bonobo expressed and understood repertoires, and there'll probably be a bit of a gap between this and the next recording while waiting for the next papers to come out. Bye!